Okay, this week's project. This one. I've been thinking about this one for a little while now. What it is a WFL 1948 to 1952, 14 by 10, mahogany inside, mahogany outside, maple support hoops. Parade drum, school drum, military drum, snare drum. It's met with a nasty accident right there. I don't know if you can see that. It is being dropped. It's been dropped badly. Right on the snare throat. Right on the snare throat. Which is a bit of a problem. From the outside it looks like, you know, that. From the inside there's got to be 3.5, 4 inches of ply by about 2 inches, 2.5 inches that are wrecked. Now the problem with that is, I suppose the simplest option would be to take all that out, fill it, put the snare throw back in. But for all that sort of, you know, putting the snare throw on and off, that's just going to weaken at some point. It's a weak point. I suppose I could fill it, move the snare throw round, recut all the edge, put the snare bed there, but then you'd have this great big lump of filler, which would look rough. It would just look rough. I could make it into a tom-tom, recut the edges, fill this, you know, I could do that. Have to get rid of these, so this would all have to be filled. So what I'm thinking of now is actually I'm just going to cut it in half. Now that might sound a little bit sacrilegious, but I'm going to cut it in half, reinstall the support hoop, so then I've got at least 5 inches of good good structural shell, and basically start again. Put a snare bed in, and you know, make a jazz festival, make a 48 to 52 jazz festival with a good structured shell. Now, or I could make it a tom-tom, or I could make it a tom-tom, you know, fill it and make it a tom-tom. But you know, there's enough tom-toms in the world, and there's never enough snares. So I'm going to go for the snare option. The problem with these are that this is mahogany finish, and this has never had like a wrap on it. It's never had like a wrap. It's gauged to be exactly the right size as it is. So if you put a head on it there now, it's fine. If you start putting a wrap on it, then the chances are the head's not going to fit on properly. It's going to be that little bit too wide. So I can put the wrap down here somewhere, half an inch or so away from the top, or I could kind of sand this down a little bit, which I don't think is going to work. I don't think there's enough of this outer ply to get away with that. It's going to have to be a very thin wrap, or leave it as it is, but I think it would just look a bit rubbish as it is. I think it could look fantastic, and that's what we're after. Something that looks fantastic, something that's going to get played, something that's going to be better off than having this stuck in my workshop forever. So this is all the things that I'm thinking of at the moment, and we'll see how the week pans out. We'll see. Right, so I've cut the shell in half now, and this is the bottom half, and you know, that's what it looks like. Now normally when I'd want to get the support hoop out, what I would do is sort of cut down and just tear it out. But I've got a little project coming up in probably the next week or week after, where I've got a drum that's gone out around, and I've never done it before, but what I'm going to try and do is take the support hoop out and reshape it so it's back in round. So I want to work out if it's possible to take the support hoop out without destroying the drum or destroying the rest of the shell.
So what I'm going to do is, I remembered somewhere along the line when I was working on a project that the glue that holds these in, these support hoops, is actually soluble. It dissolves in water, or it goes at least gooey in water. So I'm going to put it in some warm water and you know, leave it for a few hours, see what happens, and I'll let you know. This is the other half of the snare. This is the part that's going to form the drum. Now, what I've done is I cut as much of the shell out, which is 5.5 inches, and I've still got these holes here, which I'll have to fill. Now, there's a reason why I did that, why I actually made it a little bit wider than perhaps I wanted to, because first of all, these support hoops, as you can see, they're really thick, so that when I put a support hoop in here, there's not going to be a great deal of room to put the drill holes for the lugs. So it had to be a bit deeper. The other thing is, these holes will help me work out where I can drill for the new lugs. So basically I just draw a nice straight line from there to there, and then I'll get the positioning for the lugs. And also, what with it being 5.5 inches, I'm going to do a nice black oyster pearl Ringo Snare, which I think is going to be good. So this is the scrap part of the shell. This is the part that I soaked in water for quite a long time, actually, most of the day, and then I tried to get the support hoop out. Now, the support hoop came out fairly easily, I'll be honest, but it did exactly the same thing as if I just sort of cut into the shell and torn it out, and that was it pulled the inner ply of the shell with it, and also it started to delaminate. So as an experiment of getting support hoops out of shells, it was kind of semi-successful. I think I would probably not do it again. No, I probably won't. I'll probably think of another way of doing it. But I did discover this, that here's a support hoop now. Basically what happens is, on this part here, on this edge, you see all the inner ply, the mahogany, and that has to come off. Now you can sort of peel that off with a knife, or you can peel that off with, or sand it off. But what I discovered is, if you put it in really hot water, the glue just completely dissolves off, and then the mahogany just peels off really, really easily. So that was a good thing that I learned. But then what you have to do then, once you've got the support hoop, put it back inside the drum to dry off, because what you don't want is this thing to sort of straighten out, so you have a dry, straight piece of wood that you would have to remold back into a shell. So it's dried now, and that's going to be fairly easy to put into the other shell to make the snare. So it was semi-successful, that experiment, but then we learn little bits as we go along.
Now, if you've got an old drum that doesn't tune up very well, and you can't work out why, the chances are, if you take the head off and put it on a flat surface, it will rock around a bit. Now, I've seen a lot of Ludwigs, and I'm inclined to think that they probably left the factory like that. Now, I suspect they just didn't think that that level of accuracy was that important back then. But with today's sort of emphasis on accuracy and close miking, those sort of overtones and that sort of wild frequencies is a little bit frowned upon. On one hand, you could say, well, that's part of the old vintage Ludwig sound, and I'm kind of inclined to agree with that. But if you need to do something about it, or you want to do something about it, then this is what you do. What I've done is I've got some sandpaper, and I've just taped it to the kitchen floor, because that's the flattest place that I've got. You could do this on a board. Now, this is the shell that I cut in half, and as you can imagine, it's pretty rough on the bottom edge, and I've got to flatten it off to make a nice level sort of edge to create the bearing edge out of. Now, I haven't stuck the support hoop in yet, but this is what you do. So you've got your sandpaper on the floor, and you just spin it. and you just keep going, and you keep doing that for as long as it takes to get a nice flat edge, and the drum stops rocking around. Now that's going to be quite flat, but it will be flat, and then you just round it off to make the bearing edge, and I'll show you how to do that later, but for the time being I just want to get this nice and even and flat. So what I've got here is the shell, and I've just soaked it in water for not very long, about an hour, something like that, and then I've put this ratchet strap around it fairly tight, and I put a piece of the old scrap shell right where the ratchet is, so it doesn't mark the shell. What I've got to do now is get a ruler, and I'm going to measure across the shell. Well, I've already done it. Measure across the shell to make sure everything is nice and round. It should be 14 inches from lug point to lug point. Everything's 14 inches, and it is. It's all nice and round as it is there. Now, the idea that I've wet this, and I'm not going to wet the support hoop, is that the wet wood will move to the support hoop rather than the support hoop pressing the shell out. That's the theory anyway. So I'm going to start by getting the support hoop in. So here's the drum. I've just finished putting the support hoop in, and it was a bit of a pig, to be honest. Yeah, it was a bit of a pig. But basically, I glued it in. I've left it for, I don't know, a day or so, maybe a bit more than that now. I've used bits of scrap shell just to inside and out, just to stop the shell from getting marked. Now this has to be really tight, the support hoop has to be really tight, because on this shell we don't have much play, so everything has to be really tight. What I've learned from this little experience is that before, when I've taken support hoops out of shells, I've lifted them out in one piece and kept them in one piece. I haven't broke them at the seam. But the trouble is, when you put them back into a shell, it's a real pain to get in, and also it forces the wall of the shell out, so then you can't get a head on it. So this time I thought, well, I'll break it at here, I'll break it at the seam, and then just line it in, and that was fine. That was probably the easiest way of doing it. But when you take the support hoop out of the shell that you've taken it out of, put it into the shell, into the place where you're going to put it, probably when it's wet, so it molds into the shell size. Now I did that, but I made it a little bit smaller, which meant that it didn't easily glue in. So this is the second stage of the gluing, what you see here. I glued it once to get the seam and everything, but there were a couple of little areas, well, a few areas where the shell hadn't married up properly to the support hoop, so I had to glue those again. But it's all nice and tight now. We got there in the end. But we learn, you know, we learn from our mistakes or experiences. Yeah, so now what I'm going to do now is take all this off. I'm going to spin it around on the sandpaper just to flatten, get all this PVA off. That's what I use, by the PVA, and make sure this is still nice and flat and everything. And then I'm going to mark up and drill the holes for the lugs. So I'm just going to take the badge off the drum. No point saving the grommet, you can get them fairly cheaply, and it's a very easy job to put it back in. So you get one of those, and you just file it out. There you go, that's it, it's out. Don't go too far, or else I'll end up taking the badge out. Anyway, that's out. Gosh, the don't make them like it used to. There you go, one badge. So here's the shell. The clamps have come off now. I don't know if I can show you, but it's a bit blurry. But, the hoop is in really tight, nice and tight. I've tidied it up a bit. If we look inside, you see how nice and tight it is into the shell. There's no filler, nothing like that. It's good. Now then, what I've done now is I've drilled up everything for the lugs, filler. Sorry, the dampener. Everything's in. Nice neat holes. One of the ways that you get, drilling a nice neat hole is actually is something that a lot of people find difficult, but it's quite simple. When you've marked up where you want the hole to be, drill a small pilot hole, but hold a block of wood behind the hole without obviously drilling through your hands. But hold a block of wood behind it, then go through it again with the size of drill bit that you want, and then you get this. You get this, and you just push it through to tidy up the hole a little bit more. Then you get some really nice neat holes. It's really important that you drill for everything before you wrap the drum, because if you drill in the wrong place, you've got a chance to fill it and put it right. If you put the wrap on and then drill it, if you go wrong, you've just screwed up the wrap, which is quite an expensive mistake to make. Right, we're going to wrap a drum. Now, a lot of people get put off by wrapping their own drums, mainly because finish is actually quite expensive and you only really get one shot at it. If you mess it up, then you certainly wreck the finish, especially if you're talking about glass glitters, and you possibly wreck the drum if the glue dries and you pull it off and you pull the outer ply. Now, what I've done here is I've I've sanded off this varnish, this lacquer that was on there, so I've got a nice bare shell, and it's absolutely dust free. I've cleaned it as well, so there's no little bits of grit or anything. And that's one thing that you must start by doing. No grit, no dirt, nothing. Then you can order pre-cut pieces of wrap. I've actually cut this one myself, but you can order pre-cut pieces of wrap, and this one's in black oyster pearl. Now, the first thing you need to do is work out which is top and bottom. It's that way round. Right, this black line here is the seam of the drum, so that's where that part goes. Okay, then you clip it. Okay, now I've already done this one. You get a piece of masking tape or tape, anything to mark. Draw a line there and draw a corresponding line on the shell. That's where you're going to start doing the wrap. Now, I've cut my wrap just a little bit larger, a little bit taller than the actual shell. That's because if you put this drum on, if you put the wrap on at slightly off horizontal, there's a chance that it will corkscrew up. So you need just a little bit of extra wrap to take that into consideration. Obviously, you want to try and get it on as straight as possible. The other thing I've done on this one is, because there's not a great deal of play, if I put this wrap on, there's a good chance that I might not be able to get the head on. I've just cut a little bit out of the piece that goes underneath at the seam and at the bottom as well, so that when I put this over, the actual overlap at the top is only maybe a few mil. It's mainly stuck in the middle, so there's virtually going to be no overlap at the top, which gives me a little bit more chance of being able to get the head on. Now, I'm going to glue this up. I'm going to put contact adhesive there on this side of the finish and on the shell, and I'm going to let that dry, and then I can start wrapping it.
what I would do is, I'm going to have to straighten this because it's a bit curly, but you start by pressing that against there, and then you press down with a cloth or something like that all the way down, all the way round until this part is there, and then all the way around till about this part is nearly stuck down, but not quite. I'm not going to put any glue there to start with. Anyway, that's what I'm going to get on with. So I've wrapped the drum now. I've still got, this was all the plastic covering, and the way I finished off the seam was I wrapped the underside right the way around first, but I didn't glue it there underneath, if you know what I mean. I wrapped this side all the way around almost to the edge. I put a tiny little spacer there, then I put some glue in, let that dry, and then press that into position. Now the reason I did that is because the number of times when I've glued the main part of the wrap, and then had to turn it sort of upside down just to glue this one little bit. It's a fiddle. It's a real fiddle. And then when you have to let it dry, you have to have one end sort of dangling over the table or bench or whatever it is you're working on, and then you have to watch out in case when you wrap it. It's just, I find it easier to glue it once it's actually on the drum. Anyway, so that's how I've done that. So now I'm just going to show you how to trim the edges up. Now some people use a knife. I don't bother using a knife. I go straight in with the file, and this is the file, and you just pick a point somewhere, and you work up the edge, not across, up the edge. You see a nice even edge. Now obviously with all that spinning the drum, it's made this very flat, so I'm not cutting the edge, I'm not cutting a bearing edge here. I'll do that in a minute, but it's the same process basically. I'm just going to finish off this trim on both sides, and then we'll start on the edge. Right, now I've skipped forward a little bit now. Basically the bearing edge. Okay, now what this was a very flat edge, and really we want to get a curve on it. So just as we were cutting the finish off, just as I was cutting the finish off, once the finish is completely off, you just carry on going round. Now I did about 6 passes around the drum, just like that, at that angle, and an angle is produced that almost goes right up to this dark mahogany line here, but not quite, maybe about a mil away from it. When you've got that angle, you slightly flatten off the file and just go across the top, not right across the top, not like that, but at an angle, just to get rid of that line. And then I went over it with some sandpaper, gently over the sandpaper, and that turns into a nice curve there. Check for any flat spots and deal with them, and then check it on a flat surface to make sure that it's flat, it doesn't rock around, it should be fine. The next thing I did, snare beds. Now snare beds, the easiest way to do this is to get a drum that you like the look of, like the sound of, and copy the profile. Now as a general rule of thumb, what I do is I take up 2/3 or maybe 3/4 of the area between this lug and this lug in the centre. This lug area here, that's got to be the same height as the rest of the drum, there and there. So I start about there, and I dip it down about 1.5 mil. Now that 1.5 mil, that's hard to measure really, but generally speaking, where this finish ends here, there's a little piece of wood. You can see the wood sticking up on the edge there. I flatten that off, and then just gently round with a file there, so it doesn't split the head. Now what I haven't shown you how to do is to get the badge back on. This is a very simple thing to do. First of all, you need a grommet. This is a grommet. There you go.
You have to make sure you get the right size and the right colour, obviously. Put the badge on, put the grommet through, and then put it directly on a flat surface. Obviously the lugs won't be on when you do this. Put it on a flat surface. Now some guys use a ball bearing to put inside there just to get it started. So it's on a flat surface like the floor or some kind of hard surface, a bench. Put the ball bearing in and then tap on the top of the ball bearing very gently, and that will start to flare out the edges of the grommet. Take the ball bearing out and then just continue to tap gently onto the grommet. What will happen is that the edges will just start to curl around, and just keep going until it's fixed. But always check that this is the right way up and it hasn't spun, because it could do that. And that's how you do that. Very easy, it takes about 5 minutes. 5 minutes, but the key is to be gentle with it. But it should be, you should end up with a very neat grommet on the other side. So the project's nearly finished. What you're looking at here is the support hoop that was reinstalled, and as you can see, I'm just going to show you the inside of the shell. As you can see, there's no real evidence that it's been messed around with, that it's ever really been anything other than what it is now. Everything looks really nice, all the edges are nice and clean. Yeah, there's no filler in there. What I used was the original hole for the badge, and I managed to get a little red baseball bat dampener in there. The only evidence that this has been cut down, I suppose, is this little bit of filler right here. The damage from the original throw, you know, the accident that broke this part of the mahogany here, that's been filled. It went in by about, you know, ½ an inch. It's covered by the support hoop on the inside. Because I had to make it a little bit deeper, and I'm glad I made it a little bit deeper. I couldn't really get rid of that little bit of damage, so I put it there. If this was the top edge, I don't think I would have risked it, but I think because of the bottom edge it's not too bad. Just incorporated it into the bearing edge. Yeah, so on the outside it looks like this. I've put the snare throw here. I've used a modern snare throw. I would like to use a vintage one. If I can get hold of a vintage one, I might put that one in. Badge there, and the back dampener right there. The holes where the original lugs were, those were they're sort of around about here. They were filled, and that's covered up by the support hoop. So all in all, there's no real, I'm just going to give you a close-up when I'm talking. There's no real sort of evidence that it's ever been anything different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bottom head on the snare wires, just to quickly show you what it looks like complete, and then I'm going to go and play it, and I think it's going to sound pretty good. So there you go, a Ringo replica snare, made from a 48-52 WFL marching snare shell. Just give it a quick spin round. There you go.